So this morning we reflect on the Buddhist teaching and apply them to ourselves. So this word in English, reflection, is witnessing the way it is. It's not about thinking, but it's observing, witnessing. So in this, the Buddha knows Dhamma, witnesses, is a witness of Dhamma, of ultimate reality, of nature, what is natural, uncreated, the uncreated, unborn. So Buddha means is a wisdom knowledge, knowing is like this. And Dhamma is perfect and whole and complete. So it's not a sankhara, it's not a condition, it's not a phenomenon. You can't objectify Dhamma and see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, or think it. We have the word Dhamma, which is not Dhamma at all, it's just merely a word. But it's a pointer to witness the experience that we're having through these forms, these separate human forms, these bodies that are sitting here. We're witnessing them rather than identifying with them. So this is very important to see just the relationship of Buddha to Dhamma, and witnessing you at this very moment, witnessing, being aware of the way it is. So the way it is merely a convenient term because it's non-critical, it's not personal. It's not judging the way it is. It's not saying it's good or bad, right or wrong. It's witnessing. It's like this. So the important reflection is all conditions, all phenomena are impermanent. So that's the clue, the key to the door to realize Dhamma, is to not be caught up in the movement, change of the conditions of the body, of your emotions, your thoughts, your memories, because that's where suffering arises, is when we lose that perspective of awareness, we become caught up with identifying with the imperfections, the changing nature of our bodies, of our thoughts, of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. So this retreat is opportunity to begin to trust your awareness. Now this is important, to trust it, because it's here and now. It's not something you have to find and get. It's not something that's missing at this moment. Consciousness is here and now. So it's not trying to find consciousness like modern science or psychology is always trying to define consciousness, trying to objectify it. What is it? It's a brain, or is it in the body, or are dogs and cats conscious, or, the modern Western scientific attitude is very deluded, actually, because consciousness is what we experience all the time. It's through consciousness that we experience the world, the body, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the thoughts, the emotions. Without consciousness, there's no feeling, no seeing, no hearing. There's no space, there's no earth, water, fire, or air elements. So in this, the Buddha emphasized these 6 elements to reflect upon. So consciousness has no limit. Has no beginning or end. You can't find a beginning or end of it. Space, where does space begin or end? Just visual space. Because we might think the room, the meditation hall is spacious, but the meditation hall is in space. The monastery is in space. Singapore is in space. Planet Earth is in space. So space has no boundary or limit. They're the immeasurables. But without consciousness in space, how could forms manifest in their various conditions, what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, feel, remember? These are forms, phenomena that arise and cease in space, and space itself is in consciousness. So consciousness is something that we trust. We begin to trust it. It's not personal. It's not male or female. It's not Chinese or European. It has no quality, personal qualities or conditions. But without it, if there was no consciousness, there'd be nothing. It's total annihilation. So mindfulness or awareness is conscious awareness of the way it is now. Now, the way it is now in terms of its quality is going to be different from one person to the next. It's not going to be the same for everybody, feels the same way or thinks the same thoughts altogether at this moment. We different ages, different conditions, different physical problems, mental problems are all different, one from the other. So these are the elements, the earth, fire, water, and air elements. They're very changing, and we take them very personally. We create endless problems about the world, the family, ourselves, our children, our partners. All this goes on endlessly because we see the world as our reality when it's not really our reality. Our reality is conscious awareness. So this is, I'm reflecting for you. I'm not trying to tell you what to think or do, but encourage you in what you can really trust in at any time, in any place, whatever state your physical body, mental state may be. It is the way it is. And this conscious awareness is the gate or the door out of this samsara, or this world of change, of birth and death. So it's through awareness that we realize Dhamma, which is our true nature. It's what we can, what we aren't imagining. We're no longer conceiving, identifying with something impermanent, changing, and unsatisfactory. Now there are three basic obstructions to being able to do this kind of reflection. And when we talk about stream entry or insight into the path, the Eightfold Path, the path of liberation, in Pali is called Sotapanna, there are three very obvious obstacles that prevent us from realizing, recognizing the path of liberation. And that, the first one is called Sakkaya Ditthi, a Pali word. And Sakkaya Ditthi is like the ego, the sense of I am this body, I am this personality, I am a man or woman, I'm Singaporean, I'm Chinese, I'm Malay, I'm Indian, I'm European. These are all conventions that we tend to identify with and believe in, put our trust in, these very ephemeral conditions that are made up by human beings. So we reflect, like Singapore is a word that humans gave to this particular island. The island doesn't say anything about being Singapore. When you ask the island itself what its name, it doesn't answer, it doesn't have a name. But we give it a name, Malaya, or Malaysia, or Thailand, England, America. These are all conventional words made up in various languages by human beings to define phenomenon. So language itself, when we think, we're conditioned to think after we're born. We are not born thinking. Thinking is an artificial acquisition after we're born. When you're born, your consciousness is the same, it's pure. The infant form, the baby, human form, is in consciousness, not consciousness inside the baby. So this consciousness then is, we're conditioned to see ourselves as very separate. We're a boy or a girl, we're Chinese or Malay or British. These are identities we acquire when we're older. When we've lived a couple of years, we acquire the identities of communication, of language. Whatever language is an artifice. Languages are conditions, are phenomenal. So we create ourselves, Sakkaya Ditthi, the ego, the sense of I'm a boy, you're a girl, you're my mother, you're my father, I'm a Singaporean. These are all conventions that we acquire that manifest in various times and places. So Sakkaya Ditthi is a condition we acquire, the sense of a separate, I'm this isolated body here, seeing myself as separate from each of you, and because I'm sitting here, you're sitting there, what we see, you're an object to my sight, I'm an object to your sight. The whole sense of separateness is reinforced by sensory consciousness. Now the senses, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, brain, are sensory. So this is a sensitive realm. Sensitivity is its very nature. So we have to live a lifetime, however long that might be, in this very sensitive state, which we tend to make judgments about and identify with. So this lifetime can be one of, it varies, like listening to the news this morning about 20,000, they found 20,000 corpses in Turkey and Syria over this terrible earthquake. Just suddenly, overnight, the earth shakes and 20,000 people die from collapsed buildings and so forth. So all these separate forms, many of them children, infants, they're very uncertain, aren't they? The earth has these natural conditions of change. The earth is incessantly changing. With climate change, they call it climate change now, they're very much bringing it into consciousness. Volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, famine. Because that's the nature of this realm. It's about birth and death. It's about sensitivity, pleasure and pain. And so we can reflect on this in this retreat, and not see it so personally, but seeing it as just natural phenomena in its natural state of changing, of impermanence, anicca. Now most of us hope to live to a ripe old age with the safety net of social security and socialized medicine and democratic political systems, and we want our families to prosper and live. We want our children to live longer than we do, and we want to find a partner, a wife or husband that we can live with and be happy with. So there's all kinds of personal desires. Some of them good, some of them not very wise, some of them are very ridiculous. But we can be aware of that. So like awareness, conscious awareness, is aware of what you're thinking or feeling or what you desire, what the desire is in your life. So this is where you trust your awareness. You begin to just observe yourself, not judge your ego. It's not about describing yourself as good or bad, right or wrong, wise or stupid. These words don't make sense anymore in the reflective state because they're all impermanent conditions, both right and wrong, good and bad, true and false, heaven and hell, are words created by human beings to describe phenomena for communication in this realm, this sensitive realm that we're experiencing. But experience is always here and now. When we think about the future, how long will we live? Will we have good health or bad health, or the future, climate change, overpopulation, floods and famines and earthquakes. The future is the unknown, it's imagined at this moment. So to know this, we're aware, just imagine tomorrow, you're not experiencing tomorrow, you're experiencing here and now. Every moment of your life, experience is now, and it can be pleasant, painful, neutral experience. But the knowing of experience in the present moment is sati sampajanya, or conscious awareness. So the ego, and the word ego in English, like if we talk about somebody who very selfish and self-centered, we call them egotistical, which is a pejorative way of looking at somebody. We say they're egotistical, it means they're full of themselves. But we all have egos. We all have memories about our past. We all have judgments about ourselves. We see ourselves comparing ourselves to others. In modern society, or any society, whatever it might, however advanced or primitive it might be, there's always this competition of jealousy and fear and personal judgments. Because on the level of sankharas, of phenomena, nothing's the same. You know, some people are taller, shorter, some are male, some are female, some are black, some are white. And which is the best, and which is, what do we want to be? We compare ourselves to role models or film stars or leaders and so forth, to compare ourselves with people that we admire or we wish to be like. We start this in childhood. Growing up in the United States in the 1940s, I was born in 1934, very much, my childhood was very much affected by Hollywood movies of that era. And so you formed you wanted to become like a film star. They were much admired. They're the Devadas of Americans at that time. So looking back to the 1940s, 1930s, the film stars of that time that were once very glamorous and handsome or beautiful are now all dead. Where, it's you kind of see them, remember them as they were presented through the films of the 1940s and 50s. But this is memory, isn't it? We remember them, and then we remember them when they were young, and we don't want to remember them when they get old and shriveled up, because that reminds us of our own identity with the physical body, which is always growing older. Once you're born, once a baby comes into life, it just gets older and older till you reach my age or older. And that's just the form the sensitive form that we create this sense of a separate self, or sakya ditti, or the ego. So it's suffering. Sensitivity is, when the Buddha established the first noble truth, it wasn't a depressing kind of negative attitude towards life, it's an understanding that all these conditions that we experience are in the process of inexorable changingness. That's their very nature, the nature of these forms, the nature of our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or brain. All these are changing. And they don't always change for the best. You know, you reach a peak and then, like, you can only inhale so far and then you have to exhale. So inhalation, like with anapanasati, is very easy, pleasant to inhale. But you can only reach a peak and then you have to exhale. And that's the pattern of phenomena, the basic pattern of all phenomena, rising and ceasing, growing up, growing old, birth and death. And so we're educating ourselves by reflecting on this very obvious reality that we experience, but we don't tend to pay attention or understand it completely because we strongly identify with impermanence, with things that are unstable and changing. So when we identify with conscious awareness, that's what you can trust, because that doesn't change. And that's how we can reflect on experience here and now. Then the second fetter, or obstruction, after Sakyaditi is called Silabhata Paramasa, which Pali word, Silabhata Paramasa translates into English as convention, conventions, social conventions, cultural conventions, religious conventions, class conventions. So we live in a conventional world. We organize our societies. We're brought up to believe we're Buddhists or Christians or atheists. We're brought up to believe we're Singaporeans or Malaysians, or we're brought up to think we're Chinese or Europeans. And so all these are conventions. There's nothing wrong with them, there's nothing bad about them, but they are conventions that we tend to operate from. We become very conventional. We form our biases, our prejudices through these conventions. So problems with religion, isn't it? With Protestants and Catholics, or Theravada and Mahayana, or Hindus and Muslims, or Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims, or Jews, or atheists and Christians, and on like that. Are conventional identities that we're brought up to think of as wrong or inferior or something evil, so we're brought up to believe that if you're not a good Buddhist, then you're bad, or that if you convert to Christianity, that's wrong. Or in Christianity, it's very strong to convert to another religion. Or if you're Jewish, to be converted to Christianity is like being a traitor to the Jewish race, because that's a identity, conventional identity that is instilled in you when you're a child. So these conventions, we tend to bind ourselves to them and become conventional forms, conventional minds, conventional feelings about, so we can have mass wars. Like what's going on in Ukraine now. This is identity with being Ukrainian rather than Russian. These are conventions that people are dying over, fighting over. Whose land belongs to, does Russia, does Ukraine really belong to Russia? These are conventional conditions that we can take sides. We might be for Russia or for Ukraine, or we're against war. We should stop all wars is a very good idea, but it's still a thought in the mind, it's an ideal. So the endless wars that go on, when after World War II, and they formed the United Nations in San Francisco. I was it's 1945, 46 then, or 47, I think. 1947, I was about 12, 13 years old. I had great hopes that all the United Nations would unite in making agreements for safety, and we wouldn't have any more wars. There's no World War III coming. We'd all solve our problems through diplomacy, through reason and logic, and everything would be wonderful with all the nations of the planet united in this one organization. And then you see it's a good idea. United Nations is a very good idea. It's an ideal. But how united can nations be when they have these various different conventions that they're conditioned by? Can Ukrainians really, isn't that an identity they acquire when they're innocent children? They don't choose to be Ukrainians. They're given that role, instilled in a condition by culture, by identification, and then seeing the Russians as separate. This is conventional conditioning. Or here in Singapore with Malaysia and Malays and Chinese and Hindus and Muslims and so forth. These are strong identities that cause friction and a lot of strife because we see each other through the prejudiced eyes of conditioning, of phenomenal conditions that we didn't ask for or acquire voluntarily. We're conditioned by them from an early age, in our innocent childhood. So like racial prejudices are conditioned, they're not natural. Gender prejudices between men and women, all these are conditioned. The strong identity with masculinity, with femininity, then we tend to take sides, see each other in terms of a threat or a compliment or whatever. But it's Silabbata Paramasa, conventional conditioning, that's acquired during your early years, innocent years of childhood. Like a child is innocent. it doesn't pick or choose, it just absorbs what is given to it by its parents, by its family. So Srila Bhattacharya can be very good and can be very bad. It has both extremes of conditioning. We can have very good conditioning, very tolerant, very magnificent ideals, be brought up with very beautiful ideals, anti-war, equality, freedom, all the best that you can possibly think are ideals. Or we can be brought up in families with very narrow views of, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong, you're going to hell, and they can be very mean, they can be cruel. Because Sila Bhattacharya, remember, is a phenomenal condition. And it's to be understood, not to be discarded. We're not going to deny these conventions or get rid of them, but we begin to see through them. We're developing wisdom, which is natural to all of us. Wisdom is natural. It's not something you learn. So this is a wisdom teaching. But in itself, it's a teaching, it's a phenomenon. But it's pointing to wisdom, to learn to trust awareness. This is where your natural state of wisdom can manifest in dealing with the problems of life, of society, of family, and so forth. It's through wisdom that we can resolve conflicts and problems that arise, personal conflicts, family conflicts, national conflicts. So then you can begin to be aware that Sila Bhattacharya or conditioning is impermanent, unsatisfactory. It's not a refuge. It's not a refuge you can trust. Because many of us were brought up with ideals. Americans are very idealistic. So I was brought up in a very idealistic way, only to, as a child, it's very nice to have beautiful ideals. But as you grow older, you see that, like democracy or freedom or racial equality and all these are very good ideas, but that's not the way life is. It's not an ideal. Life in this form, or this changing form, is not an ideal. An ideal is created in the mind, so you can think where everybody's free and everything's fair and there's justice, there's no corruption, there's equality, there's love, compassion, there's consideration. We all help each other in a democratic society, and it's a very beautiful idea. But it's words, isn't it? So in contemplating Dhamma, Dhamma is not an ideal, it's ultimate reality. You can't create Dhamma as an ideal. Even the word absolute reality is saying too much about it. It's what you are actually at this moment. Dhamma is your true nature, but you're not aware of it. because you're conditioned through Sakya Ditti and Silabbata Paramasa to identify with what isn't an ideal. Is there an ideal man or woman existing? An ideal wife or husband, an ideal prime minister or president, an ideal king or queen. These are, you can create images of how kings and queens, prime ministers, presidents, husbands, wives, women, men should be, according to an ideal. But these forms are not ideals. The male form is not ideal, female form is not ideal. They're changing conditions dependent upon food for existence. These bodies are food bodies. We have to feed them all our whole life to keep them going. When we identify with a food body, and whether it's beautiful or young or male or female or ugly or deformed, and we have our biases, prejudices, preferences. But awareness, conscious awareness, is the gate to witnessing these conditions. Now, this gate to the deathless is here and now, so it's not something you're going to get at if you do a lot of meditation. It's something that's naturally yours. So the third obstruction is called Vicikicca, it's a Pali word for doubt. So there's this sense of the ego separate self is Sakya Ditti, conventional conditioning is Silabbata Paramasa, Vicikicca is language, thoughts. So we're taught to, all modern education is about thinking, about acquiring knowledge from books, from teachers, from research. It's all going out toward objects of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think. In modern life, we tend to glorify the brain. To say somebody has a really good brain, they're brainy. We all fear dementia as we get older, Alzheimer's disease, and these are the anxieties of old age, because anything acquired you can lose. We spend our youth being educated to acquire more and more knowledge as modern education demands more time in institutions, learning from others. So we're acquiring maybe a fantastic amount of knowledge about science, psychology, space. There's nothing wrong with this, but our attention is always being drawn out to objects of the sense, which are changing. The senses are changing. Your eyes are changing, and the objects of the eye consciousness is changing. So we might acquire a lot of knowledge, might become brilliant geniuses in terms of having all kinds of PhDs from impressive institutions and be acknowledged by a Nobel Prize or have rewards or accolades, or we might feel inferior because we aren't well educated. We identify with, I'm not highly educated or I'm very well educated, these are all sakyaditi, ego identities, and the society praises this endless acquisition of knowledge. So we want to find out about the moon and Mars, something very far away. Rather than go on a retreat and awaken to Dhamma, to ultimate reality, we can spend millions of dollars just trying to establish a station on Mars. Or there's even ideals about establishing cities on Mars when we've ruined planet Earth and we can all escape to Mars. And as kind of ridiculous scenarios like that you hear quite often. And Mars is very far away. It doesn't look like, the photos taken of Mars doesn't look like anything any place you'd want to live. Where when you look at planet Earth, those photographs of planet Earth from the moon, planet Earth is very beautiful. It's a beautiful planet. But it's changing. And that's the very nature of phenomena, is change. So words, languages, are for communication about experience, but we're very attached to words. So we want words, names for everything. We want to have, agree on what to call this or that, or whether it's good or bad. We make value judgments, moral judgments about activities or habits as good or bad. And that's the function of language, which is very divisive. It divides everything, man, woman, male, female. Immediately you've separated, the two are separate. Now there's a movement where you want to see them as equal. There's no difference between men and women, they're totally equal, is an ideal, it's not the way things are. So to recognize an ideal is how an individual imagines things should be. Like being head of a monastery, being abbot of a monastery. I remember when I was first sent to what we know now as Wat Pa Nanachat in Thailand to establish a monastery. I had an ideal for Wat Pa Nanachat, and I was going to establish a perfect monastery. But I couldn't do it. And became quite obvious within the first few months. The ideals were good. They were good ideas. But Wat Pa Nanachat is a label I gave to the monastery. Before it was just a forest, a charnel ground for the village of Bung Wai, which is about half a mile away. Well, when we fall in love with somebody, we imagine, romance is rather blinding because we tend to see them the way we want them to be. We try to be kind and good and pleasant and charming with each other when we first meet. So we can form romantic emotions around that relationship. So in the Hollywood version of my generation, it was the idea of finding the right person and getting married, living happily ever after. But that's not the way life is. You don't live happily ever after. Romance is an emotion quite pleasant when you are in love, but it is an impermanent emotion. You can't be romantic all the time. You've got to deal with the humanity of different karma, different attitudes, different habits. Learning to live with another person can be quite a trying experience, as many of you know. Learning to live in a sangha of monks is a learning experience. And that's how Luang Por Chah sees it. He was very generous in ordaining and allowing men to ordain, even though they weren't always, the perfect ideal for monastic life. He's giving everybody the chance. But then the practice is awareness of how we affect each other. So in the Sangha life, I remember learning to, at first I saw every monk, Luang Por Chah, and there were 22 monks at the monastery at the time, and I projected onto them all kinds of ideals. I couldn't speak the language, so I saw them all as highly spiritually evolved people. And then as I began to live with them, that view, that ideal vanished. You're living with other male human beings, and which you don't understand. You didn't have a language to communicate in, and a different culture, different everything. So you can become critical. You like this monk, but you don't like that monk. This monk is a good monk, that one isn't a very good one. But then through reflecting on my likes and dislikes, I could see, this is a creation I make as out of my conditioning as an American Buddhist monk about Thai monks that I'm living with, and that I'm just getting caught in the trap of preferring some people over others, or liking some, making judgments about people, other people. So I used to contemplate space when we would have meditation sessions at Wat Pah Pong. Contemplate the space between the monks, because space doesn't have any quality other than spaciousness. It's not pleasant or painful, it's not good or bad, right or wrong. The forms in space, when you begin to reflect on them, they're according to Buddhist teachings, they're empty phenomena. These forms are not kind of permanent, established forms that last. We call them empty phenomena in space, arising and ceasing. So you're developing wisdom, you're allowing natural wisdom to influence conscious awareness in your life. So you realize your true nature is wisdom rather than ignorance, no matter what, whether you're well educated or not. So language itself is to be not to be trusted. How do words affect you? How do things affect you then when you hear things, when you hear somebody criticize somebody else? When you love somebody and then somebody criticizes them, what do you feel? So you're aware, you feel resentment or angers like this. You're not trying to not feel anything. Or if you grasp the feeling, then you get angry and you won't speak to that person anymore and carry on like that. If you try to suppress the feeling, that takes a lot of effort to suppress emotions. To not feel emotions takes a lot of effort and hard work. But to recognize emotions are phenomena changing. And what knows phenomena is sati sampajanya, or conscious awareness. That's the witness to the way it is. So by trusting in awareness, you find your strength and stability in Dhamma rather than in trying to perfect worldly conditions or just giving up to in passive resignation to misery and suffering. So these three obstructions, fetters, they hold us back, they bind us to our delusions, and they're all created by human beings. So like the ego is a human creation. Social conventions, religious conventions are made up by human beings. They're not natural conventions. Language, which always creates doubt and uncertainty when we try to think too much, try to have answers for every question or solutions to every problem. We get caught in doubt. Is a phenomena that arises and ceases. And these are all creations of the human species that we identify with as the human species, but this human species has this Buddhist convention, a skillful convention, which is not to be grasped, but it's a pointing. It's a pointer, it's a directional sign at Dhamma, at ultimate reality. So again, I reiterate, Sakkayaditthi, the ego, sense of a separate self, separate person. Silabbata paramasa, conventional conditioning. And Vicikicca, doubt, created through grasping thoughts and ideas. So I offer this for today's reflection.